Ethan's world shatters the night he catches his wife Sophie secretly harming his helpless mother. Betrayal erupts, truth explodes, and nothing will ever be the same again. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. The world knew Ethan Walker as one of the youngest billionaires in the country. His businesses covered hotels, technology, real estate, and investments. People admired him for being calm, respectful, and generous. Whenever he appeared in public, crowds followed him with admiration. And beside him, always glowing with beauty, was his wife, Sophia Walker. Elegant, classy, charming, she was the woman the media loved to call the jewel of the Walker mansion. To the world, they looked like the perfect couple. Recently, Ethan invited his aging mother, Mrs. Margaret Walker, to move into their mansion. She had been living alone for too long and her health was not as strong anymore. Ethan wanted her to be close, safe, and cared for. When Ethan told Sophia, she smiled sweetly in front of him. "Oh, of course, Ethan. Your mother is always welcome," she said in a soft, polished voice. But the moment Ethan turned away, her smile vanished. Her eyes narrowed. Her face twisted in annoyance. She muttered under her breath, "So now I have to share my life with an old woman?" Sophia loved her peaceful, luxurious lifestyle. Quiet mornings, spa appointments, long lunches with her wealthy friends, and evenings of wine and soft music. She didn't want anything to disturb her comfort. To her, Mrs. Margaret was an unwanted guest. On the day Mrs. Margaret moved in, Ethan couldn't hide his happiness. "Mum, you'll love it here," he said warmly as he guided her into the mansion. "Your room is ready, and everything you need is set." Mrs. Margaret smiled weakly. Her voice was soft but full of love. "Thank you, my son. You have always been good to me." She hugged him tightly, relieved to finally live near her only child. Sophia stepped into the room with a polite smile stretched across her face. "Welcome, Margaret," Sophia said gently. But Mrs. Margaret felt a strange coldness behind the smile. Her heart sensed something wasn't right, though she tried to ignore it. The staff quickly noticed the tension, especially Emily, a young maid with a warm heart and gentle spirit. She was assigned to take care of Mrs. Margaret's needs. Emily admired Mrs. Margaret instantly. The old woman was patient, kind, and never complained. Emily also saw the way Sophia's face tightened whenever Mrs. Margaret was mentioned. One afternoon, Ethan prepared to leave for a long business meeting. "Take care of Mum for me, Sophia," he said, kissing her forehead before stepping out. Sophia smiled sweetly. "I will, darling." But the moment the door closed, her expression shifted instantly. "What am I, a nurse?" she scoffed to herself. Mrs. Margaret sat quietly in her room, completely unaware of the storm forming around her. She folded her hands and whispered a short prayer. "Lord, please bless this home, and help me understand my daughter-in-law." Later that night, during dinner, Ethan lovingly served his mother, making sure her food was warm and soft. Mrs. Margaret smiled gratefully, but Sophia only tapped her nails on the table, watching them with hidden irritation. When Ethan stepped out to answer a phone call, Sophia leaned slightly toward Mrs. Margaret. Her voice dropped into a cold whisper. "Don't get too comfortable. You won't always be treated like a queen here." Mrs. Margaret gasped softly, stunned. Before she could say another word, Ethan walked back in, and Sophia instantly switched back to her sweet, gentle voice. "Mother-in-law, do you need anything?" she asked with a fake smile. Mrs. Margaret stayed silent, but inside her heart, she felt a warning. Something was deeply wrong in this mansion, and the nightmare was only beginning. Upstairs, Mrs. Margaret slowly tried to sit up on her bed. She had slept poorly. Her joints ached and her head felt heavy. Growing old was not easy, but what made it harder was the fear that something was wrong with Sophia, something she didn't understand yet. Emily, the maid, walked in with a warm smile and a tray of breakfast. "Good morning, Ma'am," Emily said softly. Mrs. Margaret smiled. "Thank you, dear. You are always so kind." Emily placed the tray on the bedside table. "Mrs. Walker, if there is anything you need, Please tell me. But before Mrs. Margaret could reply, the bedroom door opened. Sophia stood there, arms crossed, face stiff. Emily, she said sharply, I told you to clean the downstairs hallway first. Why are you here? Emily froze. I just wanted to help. I didn't ask what you wanted, Sophia snapped. Go do your job. Emily bowed her head and hurried out, her eyes lowered to hide her fear. When she disappeared down the hallway, Sophia stepped fully into the room and looked at Mrs. Margaret with a cold expression. You don't need to pretend, Mrs. Margaret said quietly. I know you don't like me. Sophia's eyes narrowed slightly, but she maintained her calm voice. Like you? That depends. I like peaceful people. People who don't disturb my home. Mrs. Margaret sighed. I didn't come here to disturb anything. Ethan just wants me close. Sophia smirked. Yes, and that is exactly the problem. Without waiting for a reply, she turned and left the room, leaving the air behind her cold and heavy. Mrs. Margaret felt a deep ache in her heart. She lifted her hands and whispered a quiet prayer for strength. Downstairs, Emily stood alone in the hallway, breathing slowly, trying not to cry. She cared about Mrs. Margaret. She could see the pain in the old woman's eyes. But Emily was scared of losing her job, scared of Sophia's power. As she cleaned, she whispered to herself, I have to find a way to protect her. Later that afternoon, Ethan returned home earlier than expected. He walked into the living room and found his mother sitting on the couch, her face pale. Mom? Are you okay? He asked, kneeling beside her. Mrs. Margaret forced a smile. Just a little tired, my son. Sophia quickly walked into the room, her face arranged in a perfect smile. Oh, Ethan, she's been resting all day, she said sweetly. I've tried to give her food, but she keeps refusing it. Mrs. Margaret's eyes widened. That is not true. But before she could finish, Sophia gently touched Ethan's arm. Don't worry, darling, I'm trying. Ethan sighed. Mom, you should eat. Mrs. Margaret lowered her gaze. She didn't want to cause trouble, not yet, not until she was sure Ethan would believe her. That night, Emily brought Mrs. Margaret's dinner quietly. As she placed the food down, Emily whispered, Mom, if anything happens, please call me. Don't stay alone. Mrs. Margaret squeezed her hand weakly. Thank you, Emily. You are the only light in this house. Emily nodded, eyes shining with determination. But neither of them knew. Things were about to get far worse. This was no longer just a crack. It was the beginning of a storm. The next few days in the Walker mansion felt tense, even though nothing looked unusual on the outside. The sun still shone into the big glass windows. The maids still cleaned the sparkling floors. The chefs still prepared expensive meals. But inside the walls, the air felt heavy. Sophia was growing more frustrated with every passing hour. Every time she saw Ethan talking gently to his mother, every time she saw him taking her for a walk in the garden, every time Mrs. Margaret smiled happily at her son, Sophia felt a sharp sting of jealousy. Not jealousy of love, but jealousy of attention. In her mind, she believed Ethan's mother was taking him away from her. One morning, Ethan entered the dining room looking worried. Sophia, have you noticed Mom looks thinner? He asked gently. She seems tired. Sophia looked up from her phone and forced a soft laugh. Oh, Ethan, she refuses to eat sometimes. She lied smoothly. I try to help, but she pushes the food away. Ethan frowned. That doesn't sound like her. Sophia shrugged. Old people can be difficult. Ethan didn't say anything, but something inside him didn't feel right. Upstairs, Mrs. Margaret tried to stand from her bed, but her legs felt weak. She held onto the wall for support. She hadn't been eating well, partly because she had no appetite, and partly because Sophia sometimes forgot to bring her meals on time. Emily noticed immediately when she came to clean the room. Ma'am, you don't look good, Emily whispered with worry. Mrs. Margaret sighed. I am fine, dear. Just a little tired. Emily shook her head. This is not just tired. She gently helped the old woman sit comfortably on the bed. Mrs. Walker, I don't like what is happening in this house. Mrs. Margaret looked at her. You see it too? Emily nodded painfully. Yes, but I don't know how to tell Mr. Ethan without risking my job. Mrs. Margaret touched Emily's hand softly. Don't put yourself in danger. Let me handle it. Emily wanted to argue, but she stayed quiet. Later that afternoon, Sophia walked into Mrs. Margaret's room without knocking. She stood at the door with her arms folded. You need to stop disturbing Ethan, Sophia said coldly. Mrs. Margaret looked up weakly. I only speak with my son. Why does that bother you? Sophia walked closer. Because he is my husband, she hissed softly, and I don't want his attention divided. Mrs. Margaret took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Ethan is a good man, and a good son. You should be proud of him, not jealous of him. Sophia's eyes flashed with anger. Jealous? Of you? She scoffed. I just want my home peaceful. You are an interruption. Mrs. Margaret felt her chest tighten. She didn't want to fight, but the pain was heavy. You don't have to like me, she said gently, but treat me with respect. For Ethan's sake, Sophia smirked. Respect is earned. Then she turned and walked out, slamming the door softly behind her. Mrs. Margaret closed her eyes, whispering a prayer for strength. Meanwhile, Ethan returned home early again. Something in his spirit told him to check on his mother more often. He found her sitting in her room, staring at the window with tired eyes. Mom, talk to me, he said softly. Mrs. Margaret smiled weakly. I'm fine, Ethan. Just needing rest. But Ethan wasn't convinced. Before he could ask more questions, Sophia appeared at the doorway with a forced smile. Ethan, darling, we're late for our lunch appointment, she said sweetly. Ethan sighed. Mum, we'll talk later. Mrs. Margaret nodded, but sadness filled her eyes as she watched them leave. That night, something happened. Emily went to check on Mrs. Margaret and found her lying on the bathroom floor, breathing heavily. She must have slipped while trying to stand. Emily panicked. Mrs. Walker, are you okay? She helped her up gently and guided her back to bed. Mrs. Margaret was trembling. Emily's heart was beating fast. She knew things were getting worse. That night, Emily made a decision. I will not let this continue, she whispered to herself. She took out her small phone and quietly began recording audio and keeping notes. Not to expose Sophia yet, but to protect Mrs. Margaret. Because Emily knew a storm was coming, and someone had to stand for the truth. The days in the Walker mansion continued to look calm from the outside, but inside the house the tension had become sharp and painful. Everyone felt it. The maids, the chef, the guards, even the gardener. Something was wrong. Something dark. And at the centre of it all was Sophia. She had become more impatient, more irritated, more angry. Every small thing annoyed her. If Mrs. Margaret coughed too loudly, Sophia frowned. If Emily helped her walk down the stairs, Sophia rolled her eyes. If Ethan spent an extra 5 minutes checking on his mother, Sophia felt jealousy burn in her chest. Her heart was boiling, and soon it would overflow. One morning, Emily brought Mrs. Margaret her medication, but the small bottle was missing from the drawer. Mom, where is your medicine? Emily asked gently. Mrs. Margaret frowned. I always keep it here. Emily searched everywhere, under the bed, inside the bedside table, behind the curtains. Nothing. Emily felt chills run through her body. She knew Sophia had been acting strange around the old woman's belongings. Mrs. Walker, did anyone come into your room yesterday? Emily asked carefully. Mrs. Margaret hesitated. She remembered seeing Sophia walk into the room without speaking. She didn't stay long, just opened drawers and pretended to check things. Mrs. Margaret's heart sank. I think I know who took it. Emily's eyes softened with fear and pity. Mom, we have to tell Mr. Ethan. But Mrs. Margaret shook her head slowly. No, not yet. I don't want to destroy his marriage without proof. Emily swallowed hard. She admired Mrs. Margaret's kindness, but she feared that kindness was putting her in danger. Later that afternoon, Sophia discovered Emily bringing tea to Mrs. Margaret's room. Sophia stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Emily, I told you to clean the guest room. What are you doing here?" Emily took a deep breath. "Mrs. Walker needed—" Sophia cut her off sharply. "Get out! Now!" Emily lowered her eyes and walked out, but Sophia wasn't done. She followed Emily into the hallway, her heels clicking angrily on the polished floor. "Listen carefully," Sophia whispered with cold venom. "Stay away from her. I am not repeating myself." Emily nodded silently, but inside her heart, she made another promise. I will not abandon her. That evening, Ethan returned home unusually excited. "Mom, I cancelled my morning meetings tomorrow. I want to spend the whole day with you," he said happily. Mrs. Margaret smiled warmly. "Oh, Ethan, that is wonderful." Emily was also in the room, adjusting the curtains. She noticed Sophia standing by the door, pretending to be busy on her phone, but her eyes were narrowed, watching them, burning with silent anger. Jealousy twisted inside her. Ethan walked up to Sophia. "Tomorrow we'll all have breakfast together. Mum would love that." Sophia smiled tightly. "Of course, darling." But when Ethan left the room, the smile vanished. Her face hardened. Later in the night, Sophia paced in her room, her thoughts dark and furious. She is turning him against me. He listens to her more than me. She is ruining my home. The anger inside her kept rising. By midnight, Sophia made a dangerous decision, a decision fueled by jealousy, pride, and fear. She walked into the kitchen, her steps slow and controlled. She opened a cupboard and picked up a heavy metal pot. Her hand trembled slightly and, not with fear but with rage, she placed the pot under the tap and filled it with water. Then she set it on the stove. As the flame lit up under the pot, Sophia stood still, watching. The water began to heat, and heat, and heat. The kitchen was silent, but inside Sophia's heart, a storm was screaming. She whispered coldly to herself, "This house is not big enough for both of us." The Walker mansion was quiet that evening, but it was not a peaceful quiet. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy, like something terrible was hiding inside it. Even the maids moved more slowly, sensing something wrong. Downstairs in the kitchen, Sophia stood in front of the stove, staring at the pot heating on the flame. Her eyes were cold. Her thoughts were dark. Her jealousy had taken over her heart. She felt her whole life slipping away. Or at least that is what she believed. She thought Ethan was giving all his attention to his mother. She felt pushed aside, forgotten, ignored. But none of that was true. Yet sometimes, a jealous heart does not listen to reason. As the pot heated, Sophia let her anger speak. "I was here first," she whispered bitterly. "This is my home. She won't take it from me." She lifted the pot carefully. The heat surprised her hands slightly, but her anger was stronger than her caution. She held it firmly and walked toward the stairs, her steps slow but determined. Upstairs, Mrs. Margaret lay on her bed, breathing softly. She had not eaten much that day. She felt weak. She felt tired. She felt something strange in her spirit, something warning her. Her thoughts drifted to her son. Ethan is such a good man. He tries so hard, he loves everyone, even when they don't deserve it. She closed her eyes, whispering a small prayer. "Lord, protect my son, and protect this home." Emily, sleeping in her tiny servant room across the hallway, suddenly sat up. Her heart was beating fast. She didn't know why. She just felt something was wrong. She stood from her bed quietly and stepped into the hallway. It was dark, but she could hear someone moving. When she looked toward Mrs. Margaret's room, she saw a shadow approaching. A woman's figure. Moving slowly, holding something. Emily's eyes widened. She recognized the figure immediately. Sophia. She gasped softly but quickly covered her mouth. She stayed hidden behind the corner watching with fear and confusion. Sophia reached Mrs. Margaret's door. She pushed it open slightly. The old woman was lying down, her back turned, unaware of the danger approaching her. Sophia stepped inside. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the decision she was about to make. She raised the pot slowly, her breath heavy, her eyes filled with anger, her mind whispering lies to justify her actions. In that very moment, the sound of a car door closing echoed outside. Footsteps entered the mansion. A familiar voice called, "Mom, Sophia, I'm home." It was Ethan. He had returned early because his meeting was cancelled. Sophia froze. Mrs. Margaret slowly opened her eyes, sensing movement behind her. Downstairs, Ethan walked inside, confused. "Why is the house so quiet?" he murmured. He took a few steps up the stairs, his footsteps echoing through the mansion. Emily, still hidden behind the corner, felt hope rise inside her. Sophia heard Ethan coming closer. She panicked. Her hands began to shake. Her plan was falling apart. Mrs. Margaret slowly turned her head and saw Sophia standing over her with the pot raised. The old woman gasped, "Sophia, what are you doing?" Sophia's lips parted, but no words came out. Ethan reached the top of the stairs and heard his mother's frightened voice. He rushed forward. "Mom!" He pushed open the bedroom door and froze. His heart dropped. His eyes widened in horror. He saw Sophia standing over his helpless mother with the pot in her hands, raised in a threatening position. For a moment, time stopped. The pot slipped from Sophia's hands and hit the floor with a loud clang. Mrs. Margaret trembled in fear. Emily covered her mouth, tears in her eyes. Ethan stared, unable to breathe. His perfect image of his wife shattered in 1 second. His voice broke as he whispered, "Sophia, what have you done?" Sophia stepped back, her face pale. She couldn't speak. She couldn't lie. She couldn't escape what she had been caught doing. Ethan felt something in his heart break. Not slowly, but sharply. This was no longer tension, this was betrayal, and nothing would ever be the same again. For a long moment, the Walker mansion was completely silent. Sophia stood frozen in the middle of the room. Mrs. Margaret trembled on her bed. Emily hid behind the doorway, her heart racing. And Ethan? Ethan stood like a statue, staring at the woman he once believed was perfect. His eyes were wide with disbelief, his chest tightened painfully. His world, the world he trusted, had cracked open. "Sophia," Ethan whispered again, his voice breaking. "Why? Why would you do something like this?" Sophia stepped backward slowly. I can explain," she stammered. Her voice shook. Her hands shook, her mind shook, but no explanation came. Ethan took a step toward his mother. "Mom, are you okay?" Mrs. Margaret nodded slowly but weakly. "I'm fine, my son. Now that you're here." Emily ran into the room finally, unable to stay hidden any longer. "Mr. Ethan, sir, I saw everything," Emily said in a trembling voice. "She has been hurting your mother for weeks. I didn't know how to tell you." Ethan turned sharply to Sophia, pain and anger flooding his eyes. "Sophia, is this true?" Sophia looked at him, her lips shaking. "Ethan, she was trying to turn you against me. She wanted to control you. Stop." His voice was no longer soft. It was cold, firm, final. Sophia froze in shock. She had never heard Ethan speak like that before. Ethan walked slowly around the room trying to calm himself, but his emotions were too heavy. He turned to the door and shouted, "Security!" 2 guards rushed upstairs within seconds. "Take Sophia out of this room," Ethan commanded. Sophia's eyes widened. "Ethan, no. No, you can't do this." "Do not touch my mother again," Ethan said quietly, but the pain in his voice was louder than any shout. The guards gently but firmly escorted Sophia out. She resisted at first, trying to reach for Ethan, but he stepped back as if he couldn't bear to be near her. "Sophia, please leave this room," he said without looking at her. When the guards finally led her out, a heavy silence filled the room again. Emily helped Mrs. Margaret sit up. "Mom, please breathe slowly." But Ethan had already taken out his phone. "We need an ambulance," he said into the receiver. "My mother needs to be checked. Now." He turned to Emily again. "Stay with her." Emily nodded. As Ethan stepped out into the hallway, his legs felt weak. His hands shook slightly. He leaned against the wall for support. His whole body felt numb. The woman he loved, the woman he trusted, the woman he married, had turned into someone he didn't even recognize. When the ambulance arrived, the paramedics carefully attended to Mrs. Margaret. Emily stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand and whispering comfort. Ethan rode in the ambulance too, sitting close to his mother, his eyes red, his expression dark and broken. At the hospital, the doctors checked Mrs. Margaret thoroughly. They assured Ethan she was safe, just exhausted and stressed. Ethan stayed by her bedside, watching her breathe. Every rise and fall of her chest reminded him how close he came to losing her. Not to sickness, but to someone he never expected. He held her hand tightly. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I should have seen it. I should have listened." Mrs. Margaret touched his hand weakly. "It's not your fault, my son. Evil hides behind smiles." Back in the mansion, Sophia was locked in the guest room temporarily. She paced back and forth angrily, convinced she did nothing wrong. "It's her fault," she muttered to herself. "It's always been her fault." She refused to take responsibility. She refused to see the truth. She refused to understand the damage she caused. But everything was changing. The perfect image of the Walker family was destroyed. Trust was broken. Peace was gone. And Ethan's heart was shattered. What happened next would change all their lives forever. Because this was no longer a misunderstanding. This was betrayal. And betrayal has consequences. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of the machines. The evening sun shone through the window, making the room warm and peaceful, the complete opposite of what Ethan felt inside his heart. Ethan Walker sat beside his mother, holding her hand gently. Mrs. Margaret lay resting with her eyes closed, breathing slowly. Emily sat on a chair nearby, watching them with worry in her eyes. Hours had passed since the terrible moment in the mansion. Ethan had not left his mother's side even once. He looked at Emily with tired eyes. "Emily, I can't believe this happened." Emily nodded sadly. "I'm sorry, sir. I tried to help her quietly, but Sophia threatened me every time." Ethan leaned back, rubbing his forehead. "How did I not see it? How did I not know my own wife was doing this to my mother?" Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. "Sir, some people hide their true selves very well." Ethan closed his eyes slowly, allowing the truth to sink in. A little later, Mrs. Margaret slowly opened her eyes. "My son," she whispered weakly. Ethan immediately leaned forward. "Mum, I'm here. Please don't talk too much." But Mrs. Margaret shook her head gently. "I need to talk. Just for a moment." Ethan held her hand carefully. "Okay? I'm listening." Mrs. Margaret looked at her son with soft, loving eyes. "Ethan, you are a good man. You believe the best in everyone. That is a gift, but sometimes that same gift can blind your heart." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "I didn't want to tell you," Mrs. Margaret continued. "I didn't want to break your marriage. I wanted to protect you." Ethan lowered his head, ashamed and heartbroken. "No, Mom, you were the one who needed protection, and I failed you." Mrs. Margaret squeezed his hand gently. "No, my son, you didn't fail. Love makes us slow to suspect evil. That is not weakness." Emily watched silently, tears gathering in her eyes. Mrs. Margaret looked at her. "Emily, you are a blessing." Emily bowed her head shyly. "I only did what was right, Mum." Ethan nodded. "You saved her life." Emily blinked quickly to stop the tears. "I just couldn't stand by and watch." Meanwhile, back in the mansion, the guards reported something shocking. Sophia had tried to leave the house quietly. She packed a few bags, tried to get to her car, but the guards stopped her on Ethan's orders. "She is trying to run away because she knows the truth is coming out," one guard told Ethan over the phone. Ethan sighed heavily and told them to restrict her movement until further notice. He didn't want anything rash to happen until he made clear decisions. Later that evening, the doctor entered the hospital room. "Mrs. Walker is stable," he said kindly. "She needs rest, peace, and no stress." Ethan thanked him, relieved but emotionally drained. After the doctor left, Ethan spoke softly. "Mum, when you come home, everything will change. I will never let anyone hurt you again." Mrs. Margaret nodded gently. "I trust you, my son." Emily stepped forward. "Sir, there's something else." Ethan looked up. Emily pulled out her phone. "I recorded some of the things Sophia did. I didn't want to, but I was scared for her safety." Ethan's face hardened. "Show me." Emily played a few recordings. Sophia shouting, insulting, threatening, and speaking harshly. Ethan's jaw tightened. This is enough. He quietly made a decision in his heart. He would not let this continue. He would protect his mother. He would face Sophia with the truth. No more pretending. No more excuses. No more lies. The healing had begun, but before peace could come, justice had to be served. Ethan stood up, looking out the window into the darkening sky. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "everything changes." Morning arrived slowly, painting soft gold across the windows of the hospital room. Mrs. Margaret was still asleep, peaceful at last. Emily sat quietly in the corner reading a book, while Ethan stood beside the window, staring out at the rising sun. He looked tired, not from lack of sleep, but from the heavy weight on his heart. Last night changed him. He was no longer the man who believed everything was perfect. He was no longer blind to the truth he didn't want to see. He was now a man ready to protect what truly mattered. When Mrs. Margaret finally opened her eyes, Ethan bent closer. "Mom, today I'm taking you home," he said gently. She smiled softly. "Home is wherever I am safe with you, my son." Emily helped gather Mrs. Margaret's things as Ethan signed the discharge papers. They left the hospital with a quiet determination in their steps. But the mansion they returned to was no longer the same. When Ethan entered the living room, the guards stood at attention. Sophia sat on the couch, arms folded, eyes red from crying, though no one knew if the tears were real or just part of her performance. The moment she saw Ethan, she stood up quickly. "Ethan, please, let me explain," she said, rushing toward him, but Ethan raised his hand calmly. "Stop right there." Sophia froze. Ethan's eyes were no longer soft. They were firm, clear, hurt. "Sophia," he said quietly, "I trusted you with my home, my heart, and my mother. You broke that trust." Sophia shook her head desperately. "I was jealous, Ethan. I felt like you were drifting away from me." "That is not an excuse," Ethan replied. Nothing justifies what you tried to do." Sophia's lips trembled. "Ethan, please, I can change. I can be different." Emily stepped forward bravely. "Mr. Ethan, should I show her the evidence too?" Sophia glared at Emily. "Stay out of this." Ethan shook his head. "Emily has done nothing wrong. She protected my mother when you should have." Sophia's face tightened in anger, but she swallowed her words when she saw Ethan's expression. Ethan spoke again. "I have already contacted my lawyer. I want a separation, and then a divorce." Sophia staggered backward as if someone had pushed her. "A divorce? Ethan, no, you can't." Mrs. Margaret, sitting gently on the couch with Emily's support, finally spoke. "Sophia," she said softly, "you had everything. A good home, a loving husband, comfort, respect. But you refused to share your heart. You let jealousy destroy you." Sophia covered her face with her hands and burst into tears, but Ethan did not move toward her. His decision was made. "Pack your things," he said quietly. "The guards will escort you. I don't want any more shouting or fighting." Sophia looked at him one last time, hoping he would change his mind. He didn't. She walked away slowly, her footsteps echoing like the end of a long, broken dream. After Sophia was gone, the mansion felt lighter. as if a heavy shadow had finally lifted. The staff moved around with relief in their eyes. Emily brought tea and warm pillows for Mrs. Margaret, smiling softly. Ethan sat beside his mother. "Mom, I am so sorry for bringing the wrong woman into this house." Mrs. Margaret shook her head gently. "No, Ethan. Mistakes don't destroy a man. Refusing to correct them does." Her words sank deep into his heart. That evening, Ethan made a special announcement to Emily. "You will be more than a maid now," he said. "You will be my mother's personal assistant, and you will manage her care." Emily gasped. "Sir, thank you so much." Mrs. Margaret smiled warmly. "You deserve it, my dear." Weeks passed, and a new peace returned to the Walker mansion. Mrs. Margaret grew healthier with proper care. Emily became a trusted companion, and Ethan, for the first time in a long while, felt calm. One afternoon, as the sun set beautifully across the garden, Mrs. Margaret took Ethan's hand. "My son," she whispered, "real love protects, not destroys. You made the right choice." Ethan kissed her forehead. "I promise, Mom, you will never suffer again." The story ended not with sadness, but with strength. A family rebuilt, a home restored, and a heart healed through truth.